Pope Francis has named a new head of the Vatican's powerful and influential doctrinal office, Archbishop Victor Manuel Fernandez. He replaces Jesuit Cardinal Luis Ladaria as head of this Dicastery for the Doctrine of Faith, as it's now called. Here to tell us about this significant appointment and how it's being received at the Vatican is Rome correspondent for the National Catholic Register, Edward Pentin. Ed, thanks for being here. What is the reaction in Rome to this appointment of Archbishop Fernandez?
Well, there's a mix of really shock and concern among many, I think, but also, of course, those close to Francis are welcoming it. They think it's a great step forward. He's known to have been very close to Francis in the way he thinks for some time, and of course he drafted some of the most contentious parts of Amoris Laetitia, the Pope's apostolic exhortation on the Synod on the Family. And he's been very close to Francis throughout his pontificate. So I think those close to Francis are very supportive, but others are, as I say, very concerned. One senior churchman said it was a catastrophe, and especially considering he has a past of dubious theology. In fact, he had a file on him in the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, a file of concern about his theology, which I put in a piece today out in the National Catholic Register.
Yeah. When the Pope invited Archbishop Fernandez to be the prefect of the congregation, he had this to say in his letter: "As prefect of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of Faith, I entrust to you a task that I consider invaluable. It has as its main purpose to safeguard the teaching that comes from the faith, to give reasons for our hope, and not as an enemy who critiques and condemns." Ed, what are we to make of the Pope's words here? And does this signal a new direction or new focus on what the former Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith once did, protect and defend the deposit of faith?
Well, it's the end really of a trend which we've seen for the past few years, where a lot of the theologians around the world who would normally have been corrected for errors tend to have been left off the hook. And I think this appointment very much wants to continue that and perhaps make it stronger, so that those who do teach error aren't disciplined in the way that they used to be. And as Pope Francis says in the letter, he wants a different kind of approach. He wants to have that more, as he would put it, a sort of open and freer approach to theology, less sort of driven, ironically, by doctrine, but more by pastoral practice. And this has been a feature of this pontificate, of course, for the past 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Ed, Archbishop Fernandez replaces Jesuit Cardinal Luis Ladaria, who is 79, beyond the usual retirement age. Was Fernandez among the names being discussed for this position? And if this appointment was completely out of the blue, would that indicate that Fernandez was chosen specifically by Pope Francis without consultation?
Well, this is what I've heard, that he was chosen without consultation. And I think you're right. It's because he has been a close friend of the Pope. I understand that it's also connected with the recent appointment of the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, and the fact that Archbishop Fernandez wasn't given that. I was told that this is why he's been given another prime position, not as compensation, but really as a sort of to even things out. And so yes, I think in that sense it wasn't unexpected. But as we know, there was rumors of other candidates earlier in the year or last year. There's a particular German bishop who cardinals actually made their concerns known to the Pope about him, and so he backed down. But some say that in fact Archbishop Fernandez is more concerning than the German bishop because of his past views and the record he has in theology.
Ed, back in 2015, Archbishop Fernandez gave an interview that certainly presaged what we're seeing now, not only with this appointment, but with the Synod on Synodality. He said the Pope goes slow because he wants to be sure that the changes have a deep impact. The slow pace is necessary to ensure the effectiveness of the changes. He knows there are those hoping that the next pope will turn everything back around. If you go slowly, it's more difficult to turn things back. You have to realize that he's aiming at reform that is irreversible. if one day he should sense that he's running out of time and he doesn't have enough time to do what the Spirit is asking him, you can be sure he will speed up. End quote. Prophetic words. And Fernandez is expected now to be elevated to cardinal at the next consistory. What is the mood in Rome, given the speed with which Pope Francis does now seem to be moving, not only with this appointment, but with the synod and the appointment of people to that synod and the issues that are now up for consideration?
Yes, well, this seems to be very much sort of securing of his legacy, Raymond. I think he's been accelerating in the past few months in terms of changes. Interestingly, are his appointments, not just Archbishop Fernandez, but the age of these new bishops. Archbishop Fernandez is only 61. The Archbishop of Buenos Aires, I think, is in his late 50s, and others. So he wants these bishops to last a long time in order to secure that change and as or some would put it, a revolution. So he's making these changes. He's putting them into place well in time for when he dies, of course. And of course his health isn't that good, so he may be concerned that time is running out, and he wants to get these put in place quickly. And of course, with the synod coming up, that's the key part as well. And with Archbishop Fernandez in a key position, probably become a cardinal, he's likely to have a key role also in the synod, maybe this year, but certainly for the final session of the synod next year.
I have to ask you about that book written by Archbishop Fernandez back in the 1990s when he was a priest. It was titled "Heal Me with Your Mouth, The Art of Kissing." Now, the Archbishop recently called this oddly titled book a pastor's catechesis for teens and not a theology book. Now, Ed, that seems a very bizarre subject to be covered by a priest writing for teens, but he chalks up the criticism to anti-Francis forces. But the work is no longer listed as part of his official bibliography. How is Fernandez's work viewed by others in Rome? It's surely controversial.
Yes, oh, definitely. And I haven't read his other works, but I think what I've heard is that they are also problematic in some senses in terms of orthodoxy. And so yes, I think that just all round, I think, although he's written a lot, and he's clearly very clever in what he writes, I think there are problems there. And I think this book, of course, some say that he should have just said, look, I wrote that when I was in my 30s. I wouldn't write it now. But in fact, he's doubled down and thinks it's a good work and still stands by it.
Francis intends for Archbishop Fernandez, and this is interesting, to not focus on sex abuse tracking and prosecution of those cases across the Church Universal, despite the fact that the former CDF took up sex abuse cases and laicization of priests. Given that new reality, advocacy groups for the abused are already up in arms about this appointment, fearing that dealing with sex abuse allegations will no longer be a priority. What are you hearing? And the Dicastery does have a sub-office that will, I suppose, continue to deal with these abuse cases, but the Pope seems to be cutting Fernandez, the prefect, out of that equation. And I don't know why.
Yes. Well, I think he probably feels he's not able to do it. He's not sort of a suitable candidate to do that sort of work. There is also a problem of him handling an abuse case back in Argentina, which his diocese denies. They say that he handled it correctly, but there were some, and it was also carried on the wire.
Okay, yeah, that's curious. I'm stunned. I mean, I don't think Cardinal Ratzinger considered himself an expert on, sexual abuse or grooming of, minors or religious. Yeah. And yet it was part of protecting the priesthood, protecting the church. So you had to investigate these cases and laicize them. But I guess they now have a different bureaucratic apparatus to care for this, maybe. Maybe that's the math here. Remarkably, without announcement, Ed, I have to talk to you about this. Pope Francis met this week with former U.S. President Bill Clinton, and in the delegation was the chair of Open Society Foundations, Alex Soros. Now, he's the son of George Soros, the founder of that group. And as viewers might know, Open Society is associated with agencies and groups that fund legalized abortion and other political and social activities all over the world. What do you make of this meeting? And how was time found on the papal calendar for this, but not for the Dubia cardinals or Cardinal Zen, for instance.
Right, it's very odd, and I think the Pope is supposed to be on holiday. I mean, he's not having any. I think the audiences have now been cancelled. There was no weekly general audience yesterday, but he did have time to meet this group. And yes, it's a mystery. And of course, the Vatican was very quiet about it. They didn't pre-announce it. Unusually, we didn't get any pre-announcement about it. We just heard about it on Vatican News later on yesterday evening. And so, yes, it's a mystery. And I think, but it's kind of consistent with the way he does meet people of power. And he does seem to like to be part of these groups, these power structures, whether it's to influence them. I don't know. We don't know what he said in this meeting. But usually these meetings don't come out with anyone saying, oh, he tried to, convert me or tried to introduce me to the faith or change my ideas in the faith. In fact, when he met President Biden, of course, in 2021, he called him a good Catholic or Catholic in good standing. Yeah. So we have that problem, and yet he does like these events and the sort of the photo opportunities, if you like.
Before we go, the list of participants in the upcoming Synod on Synodality is expected to be released this week by Secretary General Carlo Maria Grech. What do you expect to see there? Any surprises, or do we sort of know the direction of this synod?
Well, I think a lot of the participants, as usual with the synods, I think with their still being chosen by the Bishops' Conference, I believe still select the Synod Fathers, so those will be on the list. But it will be interesting to see who the others are and who they choose, because often in the past they've been accused of stacking the deck and choosing people who are going to steer the synods in a certain direction. And we'll have to look at the backgrounds of some of these participants to see if that's what they intend to do, and because that usually gives a good indication that that's what they have in mind.
We'll be keeping our eye on that. Ed Pentin, thank you for being with us. The Next Pope, The Leading Cardinal Candidates by Ed Pentin is available at bookstores everywhere. And his fine column, by the way, on Archbishop Fernandez, some new material Ed has dug up, is at the National Catholic Register. Ed, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Raymond.